I'm Haze Hartwig. This is Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast. This week, I have one of our team members from Vancouver Rented, Peter, down here with me, and we're just going to go over basically what's going on in the property management world and some of the stats and stuff just to keep people up to date for February. So welcome, Peter.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me. And excited to talk about what's going on in the rental market right now in Vancouver and how to maybe help some landlords figure out what the trends are so they can figure out how to capitalize on them.
Oh, exactly, right? And I mean, you've been at this for, 3 years with Vancouver Rented?
3 years, yeah. 3 years with Vancouver Rented and 3 years as a property manager. So I've been loving every minute of it and working on the team with Vancouver Rented has been great.
Nice. So going through some of the stats that happened here, like the average price of a one-bedroom unfurnished has actually fallen in Vancouver an entire $6. So now the average is $22.51 for Metro Vancouver. So, I mean, it's down a little bit, but it's not like we're suddenly out buying a bunch of eggs or lettuce these days or anything like that. But interestingly enough, the rent has gone up from 2022 in February, $411. So, I mean, it seems to be kind of leveling out a bit, but not dropping drastically in that. How have you been seeing it out there? You've been seeing this sort of trend as well, or?
Definitely have been noticing that some of the properties that we've listed, we've had to reduce the price on. Mm-hmm. It does take a little while for prices to fall, especially the prices are a little stickier. So, you see the market trending downwards, and it still takes some time for some owners to realize that and have to lower the the price. Yeah. As well, we've been noticing that there's lots of properties available. The price of home sales has gone down a bit, so they're not getting the top dollar that they want. So instead, they've decided to rent it out, which means tenants have lots of choice. Means the market's kind of flooded with some of these rentals, and that's why the prices are reducing, because tenants have lots more choice, and they can kind of pick and choose what rentals they want to rent.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny that you say with the owners being late to the party for adjusting on prices. It's the same thing on the sales side. You know what I mean? Like I used to be able to get this much. Used to is not now. So it's definitely a change in that.
Yeah, it's also seasonal. Obviously, over the winter when it's cold out, fewer people want to move, so there's just less interest in general in rentals. Over the summer is a kind of a transitional period. Lots of people want to move in the spring and have a new place for the summer. So we'll probably see the rent go up a little more as we get to that, but we can definitely see it in the colder months of the year. Definitely the prices have gone down, and like you said, for some owners it's a little sticky. It can take time for them to see the market trend and realize this. And that's maybe why we've only seen that $6 change month over month. But I'd imagine that kind of the overall picture of it is that for certain properties that amount is much larger.
Oh, absolutely. And as I said earlier, like these are all averages, so they do change from city to city and their sub areas respectively. And it's funny that you touched on the spring summer, because I've noticed over the years of doing this that trends lead towards the beaches. So like down at Cole Harbour and down by Stanley Park and Kitts, those ones go up more than downtown proper, I noticed, in the summer, because everyone's thinking, yo, beach. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I've got a couple rentals that I did last year in the summer in the West End, right on Beach Avenue. Mm-hmm. Awesome places, especially in the summer. And I've rented out very similar ones in the wintertime, and the price has been lower. And
exactly.
It's a little bit of a sunshine tax, right? When it's nice out, people see the natural light coming through the windows of those places, and they think, man, I want to be right on the beach for the summer. Yeah. In the winter, it doesn't quite have the same appeal. So definitely see even area to area those kind of larger changes due to the weather.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of those things. So basically, it's a good idea to talk to a professional about figuring out the pricing, because that's how we stare at all day. It's just what's going on from area to area, and this is the way it is. Interestingly enough, Burnaby is leading by the price per square foot at $369 per square foot. and Langley and Surrey are both tied at $2.15 per square foot. $2.15, not 215. But it's interesting because possibly the reason why Burnaby is so high right now, like higher than Vancouver, is because of all the new builds. So all these guys have got brand new places. They want top dollar because no one's lived in it. It's brand spanking new. So I think that's maybe leading the charge because I don't know if you've looked around Burnaby lately, but there's a lot of cranes.
Yeah, a lot of cranes, a lot of new buildings. And I think specifically in Burnaby, some of the new builds are very, very small. I've seen some very, very small units. And you know, even if the prices say are similar to Vancouver, just because the units are so new and, to be honest, frankly smaller, then you know that obviously drives up the price per square foot. So that's definitely something I've been seeing. I've definitely stepped foot in a couple of 2-bedroom units that are probably more like one plus a den.
Right? Yeah, I'm actually like a advocate of the older places, to be perfectly honest, simply for the fact that they're just generally bigger.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You get more space for sure. There's quite a few developments in the Brentwood area right now where they'll call it the junior 2-bed, but really the second bedroom. I've seen one that they called it a junior 2-bed, but it doesn't even have a door. It's just really more of a large alcove. So, like you said, the price per square foot is definitely high in Burnaby right now.
Yeah, and you have to be honest with your people who are trying to move in. That's one of the things I have. Every once in a while, you'll have a discussion with a owner basically saying, oh, it's a 2-bedroom. That doesn't have a window or a closet. Like, that's definitely not a second bedroom.
Yeah.
Or you can't fit a bed in it.
Yeah, I mean, you can market it as an awesome den, and that's what I usually do. If it has, no closet, no window, it's definitely a den, but you can market it and say, look at this, it's got a massive den. You can do, you fit 2 desks in there, you work from home with your spouse or whatever. But at the end of the day, calling it a bedroom, it might be a little disingenuous.
Of course, and you'll end up with the person who's coming in, and now they're upset and angry, so they're definitely not going to rent your place, and they're pissed off at you. So really, just call it what it actually is, and things will be better for everybody. Yeah,
I've definitely found, you want to make things sound good in marketing, but the truth will eventually come out when the person sees the property in person, and it's just kind of better to be upfront about it. So
exactly.
Definitely a good tip for landlords.
Yeah, and one of the most active property types, as expected, is apartments. At 78.71% of the listings right now are apartments, and the 2-bedrooms taking up most of them at 49.5. So almost half of them over the lower mainland, basically, are on average there. And interestingly enough, as been last year as well, and for January of this year, the most expensive cities in Canada happen to all be in the lower mainland. So with the order being at the top 5 is West Vancouver number 1, Vancouver proper number 2, North Vancouver number 3, Burnaby, as we were just discussing, number 4, and Richmond actually at number 5, which is kind of an interesting one. I was a little bit surprised about.
I'm actually a little surprised about Richmond too. Yeah. Personally, I've done a couple rentals there, and they were kind of not on the lower end, but they were for the same price. You could probably you wouldn't get as much in some of those other cities. So I'm actually a little surprised to see it, but maybe I just wasn't renting the brand new builds in Richmond.
Yeah, there's a fair amount there by the airport now, so like maybe that's what's sort of propping those numbers up a little bit.
Yeah, there's there's a lot of kind of older buildings in Richmond, so I'm actually a little surprised to see that. I'm not surprised to see West Vancouver on the list. And when I was looking at the list, actually, I saw that West Van had one of the lower price per square foots. Maybe just because most of those are big houses, right? I think that kind of is the kind of the difference there, as opposed to there's not as many kind of smaller 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom condos. There are some being built for sure in West Van, but for the most part, these very, very, very large houses that, while they do command a high rental price per square foot, it actually almost ends up being a better deal. So.
Yeah, it sort of skews those numbers for sure, right? Which, again, that's why talk to your professionals, man. we just stare at these all day.
Yeah, it's definitely good to take a look in the area. Personally, I live in North Vancouver, and I'm always kind of just looking for rentals that, maybe for myself or some friends or something like that. It's always good to see what the market is. And over the last year or so, the North Van I found had not very many rentals at all. I feel like most people who purchase in North Van, they're not purchasing for investment, they're purchasing to live in.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'd seen, at least anecdotally. But looking on Craigslist these days for rentals in North Vancouver, there's tons. North Van and West Van, there's tons of houses available, even tons of apartments. So definitely more people listing their property, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But it also means that for landlords, it can be more difficult to find a tenant because the tenants have lots more choice, and you might need to be a little more competitive on the price.
Yeah, exactly. And even your marketing. I mean, I'm sure you've seen through Craigslist these guys with these, like, I think they're taking the photos through a potato or something, and they're all vertical, and you're just like, well, I'm like, why am I staring at a picture of like a faucet or something? You know what I mean? It's like,
absolutely. And you don't need a professional camera, honestly. Maybe back in the day you needed a professional camera, you needed to hire a professional, but to be honest, we're all carrying around $1,000 cell phone in our pocket, and for the most part, that's good enough for taking photos. And that's definitely something that I look at immediately. If the photos are, like you said, taken through a potato, it's not going to be something that I'm necessarily interested in.
Oh, for sure. I actually touched on that on a couple people that I've been discussing with. I actually recommend people do use a professional photographer just the one time, because then you have these pro photos that you can just keep on using, providing you don't, change the color of your wall or something, or knock one down for that matter. But I always recommend doing that. But either way, like, as you said, the cell phones are taking much better pictures now. Even clean your lens, like, just make it look good, especially with right now. I mean, our current society is got so many apps and stuff. I mean, Zillow and Trulia and hell, Tinder. If they don't like something at first, you just swipe on it and it's gone, right? So you want to make sure that you get those photos, your tip-top best photos. The other reason why I suggest with the professional photographers is they can do floor plans or virtual walkthroughs and stuff like that. You guys do virtual walkthroughs on your own, but with a video.
Exactly.
Gimbal, yeah?
We do video tours, so you can kind of scrub back through the video to check out parts that you missed, and I find it really helps. You can have really good pictures of all the rooms, but it can be kind of hard to tell, even with a floor plan, kind of how all those rooms fit together.
Yeah.
And that can be important, to kind of know how the whole place flows and fits. So it definitely is nice to do the video tour. It's nice to film it horizontally as well. I've definitely seen some really weird vertical ones that make me feel like I'm on a roller coaster, and to be honest, I'm sure people get car sick watching those. So definitely the video tour really, really helps.
Yeah.
And honestly, when people come to view properties and they've already seen the video tour, it's really like they've already seen it. They're really just checking to make sure it's real at that point, right?
Yeah, it kind of makes it like a gate almost. You've checked the virtual one, now you're coming for the real one. Like,
yeah, exactly. And it's nice. It's nice that they can kind of look at it and they can decide. And if they don't want to rent it and they've seen the whole video tour, then they can make an informed decision. And don't waste my time and don't waste your time, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It works, kind of works for everybody there.
So I guess you're saying if you do the videos that maybe move a little bit slower, don't just whip through the place and make people sick.
Definitely. We try and take as much time as possible. If people get bored during the video, they can always skip ahead, right?
Yeah,
it's better to have a longer video than a really short one that's whipping through all the appliances super fast. And I've seen some crazy ones that are shaky and like I said, makes you feel like you're on a roller coaster. So it's nice when you walk through the place slowly and show everything, but you don't need to do it super fast.
slow your roll, right? So according to live.rent, which is one of the sites that Vancouver Rented puts their properties on there, they're saying that the income to rent ratio average is about 38% on rent and 62% on other spending, which is usually off for most cities, but we live in Vancouver and BC bring cash. So when you're looking at prospective tenants for your properties that you're managing, what is your sort of gauge that you use, or do you have one? Or what's your thing?
I always do try and, I think the rule that I've heard is 1/3, 33%. So hearing 38% for Vancouver, a little bit higher, not super surprising, but it's still close enough. To be honest, I've probably rented to people that were around 40% of their before tax income. Generally that seems fine, especially for Vancouver, honestly. I think if you tried to stick with the 33%, you'd be eliminating a lot of people and probably a lot of good tenants, too early in the process.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
It is something that we definitely look for, though, and trying to get as close to that kind of 33% of the before tax income for it to be spent on rent. But it's definitely something to consider for landlords. With the economy being tighter, and with, like you said, the cost of lettuce and eggs being higher and more expensive, and people are definitely getting pinched. And you'd hope that paying the rent would be kind of the first in the forefront of their mind, but also putting food on the table is too. So I definitely would caution landlords and maybe start to, as the economy kind of slips, maybe tighten up that percentage, and maybe not be accepting people that are 40%. Maybe think about trying to get that as that ratio as low as possible, just to be safe, just for the next little while.
Well, exactly. I guess also taking into account type of employment would be something you might want to consider as well. For instance, certain positions such as nurses, for instance, like it's not like they're going to run out of clients. People are going to keep on getting sick and hurt and so on and so forth, and they're in high demand. So probably, I guess based on some jobs would also be a bit of a part of it, yeah?
Exactly. I always tell clients that the two most important factors that I look at are stable long-term employment, or at least, long-term for the foreseeable future, and then a good landlord reference. If I can get somebody on the phone, sometimes another property manager who says, hey, Peter, this tenant was great. I want them to stay. I wish they weren't leaving. Whenever I hear that, I think that's great. I've made a check mark. I've made a great choice. That tenant is probably going to be fantastic. If the landlord kind of hums and haws a little bit and says, oh, they were okay, but blah, 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 I might think twice. That's definitely a bit of a red flag. So those kind of two things, the good, solid employment, like you said, maybe is a little recession-proof, that sort of employment, plus the landlord reference are definitely the two things that I would look for.
Yeah, for sure. Now, speaking with the landlords, there's been those changes for the rules about renting that just happened this year, where now all the stratas can't restrict rentals anymore. Have you noticed an uptick on this, and what do you think that's going to do to the rental market? Do you feel that that's going to make it go lower? What are you feeling?
Funnily enough, I was actually talking to a client who'd reached out to me right before they did the vote on this. Mm-hmm. And I think it was pretty well known that the vote was going to be a resounding yes. I don't think it was to nobody's surprise that they did that. But the client, she had reached out to her strata and they'd actually rejected. They'd said, no, sorry, there's too many rentals right now. Mm. And she said, oh, what should I do about it? And I said, why don't we wait 3 days? Because it was just in December. It was in December, I think, or I guess it was in early December. Yeah. And I said, why don't we just wait 3 or 4 days, and then I bet you it'll be all fine. And then lo and behold, on the Thursday or whenever they voted for it, she called me up and she said, perfect, let's go ahead and rent the place. And she said, do I have to do anything? And I said, nope, just go ahead as normal. So, we were hoping that the strata there wouldn't be any pushback from the strata. There wasn't any. I'd imagine that's a pretty common story. Mm-hmm. That people, who are maybe on the fence about renting it, or they didn't want to apply to the strata, or maybe the strata had rejected them. I'm sure there were some people that did. I don't know the exact numbers, but I think the overall number wasn't a huge amount that were being restricted, or at least rentals that kind of it would open up. Yeah. So the overall housing market, I don't know how much of an impact it'll be, but having more units available definitely helps the renters. Yeah.
We may actually see more of an effect, as you're saying, as more people move around in the summer. Mm-hmm. So we might see more of an effect then, when more people now are thinking like, yep, let's rent our place. But we're going to take off in the summer and move to Kelowna or wherever they want to go, kind of thing, and just rent out where they were living.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, I think that we would definitely see more of an impact there. And as well, you might see a little more of an impact on the sales side as well. Mm. When people buy a property and they were buying in a rental restricted building, it doesn't give them as much flexibility. Now, there's obviously pros and cons to both sides of it, but obviously there's some people who wanted to rent their place and weren't able to, but if they maybe sold that property now, somebody might have the flexibility to do that, and who knows, might increase the price a little bit if they know that in the future the buyer could rent it out to somebody.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So for the Lower Mainland, just a quick look over on Craigslist, which is one of the major sources of rentals in Vancouver. The Lower Mainland has 8,100 listings with an average price of $27.43. And that's for like all of the Lower Mainland. We're including Langley as well as downtown Vancouver and West Van. So it definitely like disperses it all out there. And interestingly enough, if you add in pets permitted, that number drops to 1917 and the price goes up to 3,057. So that's a 23% are pet friendly out of all of these rentals, these 8,100, and you can get 314 more on average. So in your opinion, do you feel that it's a worthwhile risk to allow for pets? Or like, if your landlord asks you, should I allow for pets or not? What's your kind of thought process?
The most part, I usually let the owner just decide themselves. Personally, it doesn't, I don't mind if they allow pets or they don't. My job is essentially going to be the same. I'm going to vet the pet a little bit, just as much as I would vet the owner. But, at the same time, I think it really more depends on the type of property.
Yeah.
For a big house with a backyard and maybe not too many carpets, I would say probably allow pets. If there's carpet everywhere and maybe the carpet's newer and you don't want to replace it, I would think maybe twice about allowing pets. That's just me personally.
Yeah.
But I usually kind of allow it to be open-ended. You're certainly not going to completely cut off a ton of the rental market. There's lots of people with pets out there, but there's also lots of people without pets.
Yeah,
so, as much as we all love cats and dogs, and I've had owners tell me that, I love cats and dogs, but I don't want pets. And I say, it's no problem. I'm sure you love animals, but if you don't want a pet in your property, you don't want a pet.
Yeah.
And I guess that does bring up the question, talking about the strata restrictions, if whether that's something that the province might consider in the future. It's basically saying that you can't discriminate against people with pets. I know that that's something that maybe the media has been talking about, and I'm not sure if that's something the province would ever consider. But who knows?
Yeah, maybe. That's the rules back east, like in Toronto, and that you can't discriminate based on a pet. I'm sure there's a bunch of people that do, because you can usually tell if somebody has a pet or for some reason they're just covered in cat hair for some unknown reason, right? So, I'm sure there's still some discrimination going on with it, but you can't just blatantly put in no pets back in Toronto. So that might be something that Vancouver is moving towards. They have to change the act, obviously.
I really think that the part of changing the strata things was obviously, to open up, that was the idea, was to open up more rentals. And I think that that's kind of what they're trying to do, is incrementally find ways of just putting a few more rentals back in the market. If they can change a rule here that puts more, and they change a rule here that puts more, eventually that will add to the supply. I think overall building more places for people to live in is probably the best way to do it. But, incrementally adding these changes to the Strata Act or the Residential Tenancy Act, that could increase the supply and definitely help out the housing crisis.
Yeah. So at the risk of sending a trigger for some of our listeners here, do you think that Airbnb and VRBO and all these like short-term rentals are damaging it as much as being said, or what do you feel on that?
To be honest, I've looked at the numbers and I don't really have a big sense of how often. It's hard to tell how often those Airbnb places actually are rented out. Yeah. Right. Some of them, I'm sure they put the ads online a lot, and maybe they're only rented out some of the time. And as well, a lot of those places, maybe for individual condos, sure, maybe those would be rented out on a long-term basis. Yeah. But sometimes it's just maybe a basement suite, and there's not a 100% chance that the owner would rent that place out anyways. Maybe it's Airbnb or nothing. Yeah. Right. So it's tough to say. It's tough to say. Obviously, as a rental property manager that focuses on long-term rentals, I would love it if they decreased the number of Airbnbs or restricted it more, obviously, because that would be good for my business. Yeah. But personally, I don't really have a overall thought on it. I'm not sure if that would help. I'm sure it would help, but I'm sure a lot of people would be upset, and maybe it's overreaching. But
yeah, you can't make everybody happy, right? So
exactly,
someone's going to be upset either way.
Exactly.
So if people are trying to look to get a hold of you for property management or placement only, or really any help for the property management side of your business, how would they find you?
They can find me at vancouverrentit.com. On our website, which if you're listening to this podcast, you may already know about. I've also got, that's the best way, reaching out to Vancouver Rent It, and you'll be able to find me.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming down to the podcast here and enlightening Vancouver with your ideas and plans for the future of property management. So thanks for coming down.
Cool. Thanks, Haze.
Wicked. This has been Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to touch on anything else in the property management world. If you found this property management podcast interesting, please do be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you soon.